Oh, man. We're going to go down a dark little rabbit hole on this one, buddy.
No matter what quality tool you buy, it's not going to improve the quality of your work.
If you don't have somebody that can answer an Angie's List phone call within 5 seconds, your conversion rate goes down tremendously.
You talk about young people, we're not teaching them what they need to be doing.
I have made a lot of bankers angry. I have made a lot of contractors happy.
How do you deal with customers that ghost you after the work has been completed?
Those terms and conditions, man, they save a lot.
When do you stop renting equipment for jobs, and when do you just buy it outright?
Our one mistake that we can brag about is that
one of the biggest misconceptions is...
Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
All right, it is showtime. Terry, you ready today?
I'm ready to go.
Cool. We already got them cracked up. Hello, tradies. Welcome to another episode of Beers with Contractors. Terry, we diversified ourselves this last weekend, didn't we, buddy?
Yes, we did. Got some culture.
Yeah, you want to tell everybody how us two rednecks got to be cultured this weekend?
Well, the idea of us walking around a wine and craft festival in Guthrie, Oklahoma with our better halves while they're off sampling and buying wine. And thankfully there was a couple beer tents, the big friendly bus.
Yeah, we became best friends with those guys. Yeah.
No. That was beautiful weather, beautiful day, great event. Just good to get out and see downtown Guthrie growing like that.
Going back to the big friendly food truck. For any of you out there listening, Terry, if you don't know him, is just a gargantuan of a guy. I mean, what are you, 6'7", 6'8", Terry? I mean,
little bit shorter than that.
Yeah, but he storms up to this beer truck, which is in a school bus, and he goes, "Hey, how do you get your permits for this?" You know, no introduction, like, "Hey, we're just curious because we may want to start our own food bus." That kid looked at you like, "Are you with like safety and planning or the health department?"
I need to see your permit and have free samples, please.
Yeah. After I eased it up, I'm like Steve Buscemi in the back. Like, I'm like, "Hey, fella, don't worry. He's fine." But we buddied up, and he got to show us the whole operation. Essentially a school bus with a kegerator in the back, like a chest freezer.
Yeah, it's a chest freezer that they probably have a thermostatic control on when it turns on and turns off. But it was literally a short bus, a short school bus that I think they rattle canned that thing, looking at the paint job. But
I saw the wheels.
You know, how hard would that be, though, to have a bus full of beer and you're driving a bus full of beer and then not to drink and then drive the bus full of beer anywhere else?
Well, hey, I was surprised because the guy even said, we were like, "Don't you have to have like a license to serve?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's like $10 and a 5-day waiting period or something." And I'm like, we have made poor career choices, Terry.
Well, we are drinking and video recording, so.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but yeah, we got to show those people some culture, us two hillbillies walking around drinking beer with all the winos, which it was a fun time. Ladies had a good time. We had a good time. And man, that downtown area is coming along, so it's pretty cool. So, all right, Terry, first one. Every 8 to 10 episodes, we go to our world famous, we need a little intro music like do-do-do-do, Q&A episode.
You got to do subscribers.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for reminding me. Forgive me for all of those that are listening on different platforms. I haven't been doing very good at getting to you, but starting to pull those from Spotify and Apple and TikTok. And heck, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of those. I do want to make sure before we get going, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so when we put out new content, you guys have that. Much like last week, we went through our goal planning session, which is a little spinoff because October is my favorite time of year. And of course, this episode is on the eve of Halloween. Ooh. So it's funny that our first subscriber that we're going to give a shout out to is Mr. Steel Yo Candy Bar. Thank you for subscribing. And then, dude, we got a wave of tradies this week, Terry. I got HVAC with Alex. Thank you for subscribing. HVAC Guy 0330. The Carpet Guys, and Harrison Roman. Thanks for subscribing. We will try to keep it interesting here, and we'll try not to make fun of each other too much, but anything for your viewing pleasure. So, all right, Terry, Q&A episode. So this is always fun through the month. Actually, we take about 2 months to stack up a bunch of questions. I get asked questions from folks all over the country that I consult with. I'm also a member of a few Facebook groups that I'm moderator on. And it's kind of interesting to see kind of what the questions are. And rather than keeping them concealed to those little areas, it's like, well, let's just talk about them on the podcast. So maybe my answers will change with a few beers in my system.
Yeah, you'll never know. And make sure you guys understand that if you have questions, please leave them in the comments and we'll address them for the next time we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, and by the way, if you are commenting on these things, I'm the one that's replying to you. I don't have some fancy schmancy secretary named Terry Kleinfelter that's replying to all these comments. It's me. All right, drum roll. Terry, first question.
So the first question deals with looking at a customer and their final invoice, Will. So if you're looking at a final invoice and when it's due, how strict are you on that due date?
Oh, okay. So let me think about this. So we have a customer, invoice is due. Well, let me back into this question because to be clear, my process is we are due upon completion. Done. That's executed the contract. And I got to give credit to my team. We're collecting currently about 95% of our projects on the spot when they're done. I've got some crews 100%. And the lesson that I've learned there is they are talking about it throughout the entire process, not just the install crews, but the salespeople, the office team, the people that are scheduling the appointment. Mm-hmm. And people know they have to pay for it naturally. So that's one of those where it's like, oh, cool. Well, like if they're repeatedly doing it, then that sets the precedence of, hey, we got to pay when we're done. Now, I do have some stipulations in the contract. So if there's just some wiggle room or what I call condition, and to be clear, I define it objections versus conditions. Objections would be like, hey, there's some things here that I think need to be done before I finish the project. Conditions are things that are just out of everybody's control. So, hey, I live in the house, but my parents own it. They're the ones cutting the check. You know, they're gonna mail a check, right? So, anyways, I do have some language in my contract that shows that if the project goes over 30 days unpaid after completion, that they are then charged. And by the way, it's not a massive amount. I think it's 0.013% per annum, which means annualized. So, but that tacks onto the contract every single month. So then that way it's like, hey, if you're going to continue to wait without documented, call it quorum or conflict, which is in our contract too, to say, hey, if you dispute anything, we need that in writing within a certain amount of time frame. You can't wait 2 weeks, then say, oh, wait, there's a problem. And that's all, to be clear, it's not buried in the fine print. It's literally the very first paragraph above on the first page where they sign. And we actually go over that in detail when people sign. And that has helped us tremendously.
So have you had a contract with each time you make a sale since you started your business, or was this something that you worked into? And do you think that contract helps get them to that finish line and pay that bill?
It's so funny. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I've got two examples there. My younger days, I thought I knew what it was, but I just got like some ticketing book from like Staples or Office Depot. It was little carbon copy things. It looked like I was a waiter, Terry.
Yep.
And then be like, fix fence, this, put plastic in crawl space, this. And then I didn't even know what to put like for like labor. So I just put miscellaneous, this. And I'd hand it to him. There was no signature, but based on, our previous episode, with our attorney, Matt Jones, that essentially set up all the contract terms. Now, what's funny is my son gave a proposal. He started this business a few years ago where he was doing in-ground trampolines. And he put out some things on Google and Facebook. He got a lead. And, man, we were waiting for him at home. When he came back in, we were like, how'd it go? And he goes, man, it went great. And I was like, cool, let me see your proposal, which is essentially his contract. And it was like, it didn't even have a name. It didn't have an address. It had like in-ground trampoline written in bad like script. And then it was like just a flat number. No terms, conditions, nothing. And I'm like, all right, buddy. But hey, he was 18 years old. And heck, I was doing something just as bad when I was like 24. So I just didn't understand that's how it's supposed to work. But those terms and conditions, man, they save a lot. I do encourage contractors, if you are out there giving people 30 to 60 days to pay your invoice, dude, you are just starving yourself of cash. And you have got to like set some terms because you've already paid your people. You've already paid your product, material vendors. You paid, heck, the utility bill by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you're not a contractor. You're in the finance business.
Yeah, and you're paying interest on all that money that you're using to cover your costs if you don't have that money stacked up somewhere. So it's costing you to do that.
And I guess we could expand on that if, you could set some terms in there to where if the customer needs certain amounts of time to pay, then just make sure you're covering your margins on that. Because, man alive, we are not in the banking business. We're in the fixing stuff and building stuff business. Yeah.
So what percentage or how do you think it would look in terms of getting paid? Are people paying you with check, cash app, Venmo, beer? Like how are they covering that bill?
This episode is sponsored by Performance, the bonus system designed to increase profits for your construction company. Performance incentivizes your production team for more efficient installs and rewards them when they beat your preset labor goals. So no more milking the clock and no more unnecessary gas station trips. Performance drives your team to work harder and smarter. Every construction company on Performance has seen a 7% decrease in direct labor costs or more. Click the link in the description or visit performance.co to schedule your demo today. That's PER4 MANCE.co. Reward your team, retain your team, grow your profits. Performance.
I was going to say yes to everything until you said beer, but there have been circumstances where I've considered it.
That's called a tip. That's a gratuity right there.
Which who would have thought we had to put that in our HR policy? But yeah, there's a rule like, hey, if the customer offers you beer at the end of a job, while it's a nice show of gratitude, please do not drink beer on the job. All we need is some news van to drive by and they see all of our guys sitting in some customer's yard. It's just funny. You never think about this when you're doing your HR and SOPs. But so to answer your question, yes, everything that that can convert to currency, because we want to reduce the barrier of entry. And we've taken Cash App, Zelle, Venmo. We take credit cards, cash, check. Heck, cash is a little bit more frustrating to deal with nowadays than anything else. But
Really?
I think, as a prediction, that you will start to see that cash payments people will probably start charging more for cash payments just because of all the security and the runaround to get that cash into the bank. But that would be bigger companies, maybe not the smaller outfits, which is fine. But when we have customers give us $5,000 in cash as a final payment to the crew, they're only one window rolled down in the truck for all that to be sitting on a highway somewhere. And I'm thinking, there's no transaction record.
Yeah.
Like, I can't recover it. But anyways, hopefully that answers that question.
So if you're doing credit cards, are you now charging? Because I've been out and I've been making purchases and I'm seeing these credit card fees pop up, and I understand that the vendor is trying to cover themselves because they're getting this cost applied to them and they need to pass it on. But how are you charging for credit card fees? And if you do, are you showing them?
Yeah, and I think this depends on the stage of the business you're in. So if you're a smaller company and the owner is still call it the salesperson, and they're running the office, I'm completely fine with charging credit card fees. They can control the flow a little bit better. Everything's going smooth. But as you scale, like, honestly, just bake your credit card fees in, because when you have 10 to 12 sales reps out there and they're trying to help close deals so you can get your backlog built, we don't need the barrier of entry. And I would even say, when you start getting involved in math and heck, you involve a discount, things like that, then just make sure to build it in. If you're going to build in credit card fees to your price, I want to be very clear. Don't just mark it up 1-to-1, because you're not covering your indirect overhead. You have to say, if it's 1% credit card fee, you probably need to make it 3.5% markup over your revenue price, or your, call it, price to customer, because you have to cover the indirect overhead, not just a finance fee. You've got to cover the rent and the owner's salary. You got to cover the utility bills, your insurance, all that. So yes, I charge for credit card fees, but it's baked into my price. In the younger days, yes, I used to charge 3% if they wanted to run a credit card.
So you just talked about something, and it's something that I talk to all my students about. When you get out in industry, you have, and what you talked about was overhead, right? So you have general overhead, and then you have project overhead. And this is a little bit of a test depending on how many beers you've had. Do you know the difference?
No, actually. Go ahead and tell me, Terry. I want to see
Okay.
it. It's like, no, I know the answer, but do you know the answer?
It's so much easier in the front of a classroom, I swear. But
Yeah.
so from what I understand, general overhead is the cost of operating your organization over 12 months, and you have to break that down over all of your projects that are going to occur over the next 12 months, and you have to break it down evenly.
Yep.
Your project overhead is specific costs associated with doing that job that can't be assigned to maybe one of the specific aspects of it. So, it's not the material, it's not the labor going into it, but it's these other costs that we're incurring, but we're incurring because we have that job.
So this is what I love about this, because I can typically, when I review a P&L, I can typically tell the difference on who's setting up that P&L depending on the CPA or whether or not they're doing it from some form on Google. So yeah, G&A, and that's funny, some people don't know that it's not G, the letter N, and A, it's G and A, general and administrative expenses, or G and A overhead. And just understanding that, I understand those expenses, but I don't title those that way in my business, and most of the companies I work with don't. You can. There's nothing wrong with that. If Martin Holland was on here, he'd probably yell at me. By the way, plug for Martin. He wrote the book Profit Problem. He was on our show several months ago. But yeah, very clearly, I like to break it down into direct overhead, indirect overhead. Back to your G&A. Yes, we do measure for the year, Terry. And we measure that to say, hey, by the way, as a company, while we may make money month to month, we don't make money until we cross this line annually. And it is super helpful to break that down. So if you're going over that with your students, that is pinnacle, because most contractors that they're going to go work for don't know that, which is crazy. But, you're changing the world one student at a time. Just like Miguel a few episodes ago. It's amazing.
No. So that line that you have where it's basically you're moving from in debt to break even to making profit, right? Do you let your sales team or your employees know that line?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I let them know. And more for a few different reasons. Culturally, I think it's really important that employees understand how money flows through the business and how much is not left over after a check's brought in. And I've had this happen for years where somebody collects, say, maybe an $8,000 check from a customer. They're bringing it home and they're thinking, oh, $8,000. Will and Sydney are putting this in their pocket, all of it, right? But then through educating, and Jack Slack wrote a great book called The Great Game of Business. He took over International Harvester when they went bankrupt. And he practiced in the early days. Now it's known all over the country, but this form of open book accounting, where essentially, now granted, International Harvester was an employee-owned company, but the practice still works today, where they actually go through the P&L, they go through the finances, the statement of cash flows, and it helps them understand it. And for anybody out there interested in this, I don't care if you have a 3-person or a 5-person team. We actually play this little game where we get the profit and loss, and we take these fake $100 bills. We got them off Amazon, and everybody gets a little piece of it. And so we take the big stack, and here's our income. And as we go around the table, somebody represents the vendor, then someone represents, the direct labor, then somebody represents the insurance company, and so forth and so on. By the time it gets to the end, there's just a little sliver of that cash left over. And then guess who's sitting at the end of the table? Me.
You're sitting.
Oh, and by the way, before it even gets to me, there's another person there called taxes.
Yes. If you ever want to have an enjoyable time, you take a young person, 18, 19, 20 years old, which they probably have had a few part-time jobs, but nothing real serious. And you talk to them about taxes, and you talk to them about what that's going to do and how that's going to affect their monthly take-home. And it is, you can just kind of see the color drain from their face when they realize someone else's hand is going to be in there.
Well, I got to tell you, it's one of those where it's like, I think you saw this, and maybe this is just the weird thing that's going to keep on happening, is nowadays, we're just not taught this stuff in school. Now, granted, not everybody needs to know about how finances work in a business if they don't want to be in business, but, man, it's such a valuable thing, and just taxes in general. And I want to be clear, I'm no expert on it, but, man, I'm still confused with the tax book. And a good friend of mine told me, he said, what you need to understand about the tax book is this. The first 10% of the tax book is to tell you how to pay taxes. The rest is how not to pay taxes. And I'm like, that sounds good on a Be Real, but I still don't fully understand taxes. But that's why I pay people to help me with that. But the fact is they're always going to come due, so you got to budget for them.
No, I mean, you talk about people or young people not maybe needing to know about it because they're not getting into the finance side of owning a business, but they're all going to have to manage their own finance. And the idea that we're not preparing young people, we're giving them all the tools and the knowledge and the training to go out and be successful and make money, but we're not teaching them what they need to be doing or what they shouldn't be doing with that money. My biggest fear is one of my kids going out, getting that great job, making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and then driving up to say hi in a $40,000, $50,000, or $60,000 truck, brand new, on payments. I mean, I've seen it, and it's just like you hit yourself in the forehead like, I failed. I forgot to cover that topic.
That's all right. It's one of those where it's like, consumerism. You're not going to change the machine every day, you're not going to change the machine overnight, right? Including consumerism and all this stuff. They see a bunch of, call it, and by the way, I'm not hating on the roofers there, but you see the roofers come through in their monster trucks, and it's like, oh, they must be successful, and it's like, no. And hell, to be clear, I drove a used cash-only 2012 Chevy Sonic for 3 years, and if any of you guys want to dispute that, I will gladly show pictures of that. Everybody call it the roller skate. I paid $3,000 on a used car lot for that when we were doing $5 to $7 million a year. Actually, no, 5 to 12, because I didn't want the payments. I didn't need the debt on my balance sheets, and that actually gained a lot of respect from my team and my employees. So, and we found them being more sensible in their financial decisions because of it. When you asked me to be an advisor for the college on business administration, was it? What's the?
Well, let's be honest. We asked you because you're successful and charismatic. The goal was that your wife would actually say yes, because.
Hey, by the way, well, hold on. Do you want to tell the listeners why I told you, no, I don't want to do this?
Well, I've known you for long enough, and I understand who you are. But the idea here is, you're gung ho. You'll get up and you'll rally the troops, and you'll be all energetic.
I was disinterested when you told me, no, it's not about teaching kids about entrepreneurship and business. It's about preparing them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I am definitely not the guy that needs to be telling the people. Like,
All right.
It was noble. But then again, after some conversation, yes, Sydney should have been doing that. So,
Yeah, no.
but all right, where are we at on our questions?
All right, getting back to them.
We
So,
went off the rails on a crazy train there. So,
oh yeah. So, how do you look at financing your projects, and how long is your average job, and how long are you carrying that cost for?
Okay, so when you're looking at financing a project, a lot of people think about this about going through the bank, meaning I've got a big project and I'm going to need to finance it through the bank to carry or bridge my costs to the final. But I want to rewind a little bit here because there's a lot of companies that, honestly, if you have a net 30 with your supplier, that's technically financing. So if you have a short sales cycle, you can typically sell that job, buy the materials. The vendor will float the cost of that material to 30 days. And if you can get it in the ground and collect it, then you can pull that back and you got zero interest on that project. So if you're dealing with a vendor that gives you, a net 15, net 30, I've seen some vendors give net 60 on stuff. I think it's crazy that they do that. And there's even vendors that are doing consignment now. Shorter the sales cycle, it's easier to use vendor finance, and you won't find that term very often, but vendor finance is common in the trades. We got to go to the supply house, we're going to buy this, and then we buy it, and then we don't get billed till 30 days. Well, heck, you've already collected those funds. Now we get into other things. And listen, the bank has created all sorts of ways to try to make interest earned on contractors. In fact, anybody. Yeah. Oh, Terry, because you have been through this, and I want to hear your expertise on this here in a second. But on longer projects, typically you get into accounts receivable loans, which I'm not a fan of. I'm more of a fan of a revolving line of credit or a credit system that gives you payback. But account receivable loans, essentially the bank is looking at your accounts receivable and assuming that you're going to collect a certain amount of money. And then what's going to happen is they're going to charge you an interest on top of it. That interest is going to eat up your margin, so you got to be very careful. Yep. So I'm a big fan of be the bank. If you got to finance and float something out, 30 to 90 days, then that's what you do. Now, I'm not in the commercial world where projects can go 9, 12, 16, 18 months. I know those are structured a lot different. Maybe we find somebody online, or not online, but on the show to help with that. But, you find this on yours, Terry, when you're financing long construction projects. How are you financing those?
Well, so we look at any project that we're either getting into or mulling over. And so the idea is how much of that cost that we're going to incur can we handle? And at what point do we need to step out and either dip into a line of credit or take a construction loan on something? And so similar to you, we try and make sure that we can cover the costs associated with anything up into a certain point. And that allows our speed to be relatively, we can go a little bit slower when we're covering the cost because the only thing, we're not incurring that interest debt.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, when the cost associated with that construction is past what we either feel comfortable laying out or what we have, we'll go to a line of credit that is secured with other assets, and we'll pull from that. And as soon as we start pulling money from that, the bank starts hitting us with cost. And so it's just at that point when we are starting to incur interest cost, it is a race. We're trying to get that property turned as quickly as possible, make sure it's getting it back on the market so we can recoup some cost or some income from it, and then either put it on permanent financing, which usually has a lower interest rate and better terms tied to it, or try and pay off what we have borrowed or what we have pulled against our line of credit. But yeah, I mean, you talk about 30 days. I mean, everything from residential to commercial, you're talking a lot longer on that, and you're carrying those costs for a lot longer.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when we talk about things like house flipping or turning properties, buy and holds, we need to have him as a guest on the podcast. His name's Stephen Van Kallenberg, wrote a great book called Be the Bank. And he's a real estate guy. He understands essentially private lending. Mm-hmm. And I have done this on a few deals where I'm a private lender because we know the bank's not going to close on something or approve a loan very quickly. Right. So the private lender is essentially the bridge between project start to bank close, and things are moving quick. Now, that's the only thing, like, he's the expert on it, I'm not, but it's wild how that world works. And there's a lot of capital out there where people are using self-directed 401ks or IRAs to then loan to contractors and then eventually make the returns, and then they put it back and they keep the returns. And it's a pretty cool book, Be the Bank by Stephen Van Kallenberg. I'll have to text him, let him know I gave an unpaid shout-out on that. Sorry, Terry, what were you going to say?
No, and what you bring up is the idea of being able to go into any deal and be able to say, we're doing this for cash, or, have that money behind you where you're not having to go through the bank for approval or get it inspected. It gives you a lot more freedom in that deal to purchase something that needs a lot more work if you feel comfortable being able to do it, but also to say, hey, we're going to make this easy, so let's make that price a little bit lower. So you can usually get that, knock off some points in terms of the cost associated with that project if you're able to bring cash to the table.
Yeah. Well, and for color commentary on this topic, and boy, we went into depth on this question, but this is good because, Terry, you and I are on two totally opposite ends of the spectrums. Here I go. I'm messing with my singular versus plural vernacular here. From our perspectives, my job cycles are very short. On average, my jobs typically last anywhere between 1 to 4 days, sometimes 5. We get into some jobs, but no more than 2 to 3 weeks. Now, one thing that's interesting about my business, and many contractors have out there, is their backlog may be, and what I mean backlog is scheduled work that hasn't been installed yet, maybe 2 months. Currently, I think we're at like 10. No, not 10. Sorry, we're at 6 weeks right now. Well, just because you have that backlog, what happens is the sales cycle, is quick, but the cash cycle is a little longer. So if you're not good at curving the line on overhead and managing your inventory for home service businesses, you find that product availability and profit actually get suppressed during the moments you have higher backlog. And then when the backlog shrinks, like in winter, you turn around and you're like, oh, wow, we're profitable. Well, really, all that meant was you just increased your cash cycle. Your sales cycle is still the same speed, but your cash cycle is faster. So that happens a lot. But I just want to make mention, just for comparison, for the home service guys listening in the room, that's the kind of swimming pool I kind of fall in. As a follow-up, being careful on your inventory management is immensely important. So if you're in the trades businesses and you're having to purchase product ahead of the projects, try to get that as close as possible. Or if you can get grace from your inventory, or not inventory, but your suppliers, to even consign, meaning you don't own that product until it gets handed over, boy, it'll make your life so much easier because you just have the product in your warehouse. And back to Michael Morrison's episode about systems and processes, is if you get good at inventory management, vendors will gladly park product in your warehouse that they won't charge you for until you've used it. And that is so helpful on inventory management. It's called consignment. I love it. It's not very common in my industry, but electrical, HVAC, drainage, plumbing, that exists, and man, it is awesome. So, whew, damn, we're only at question 3, Terry.
I know.
Either we are good or we are inefficient.
One of the 3, right? Well, how do you deal with customers that ghost you after the work has been completed?
Oh man, we're gonna go down a dark little rabbit hole on this one, buddy. So, all right, customers that ghost you on completion. Oh, let me try to see if I can keep my temper down. So we've all had that customer that we're done. They say they're happy. You call or email or collect payment later, and just no response. So the fact is most companies know that this is automatically an issue. But most contractors, like, they're human beings and they've never been trained to handle conflict, okay? So let's just be clear. Most contractors out there never thought, like, man, I need to ask for my money. I need to pay for my vendors and my employees and things like that. So first thing is if a customer is ghosting you, you need to really take a look back at your contract. And I hope this doesn't go viral, but I have a lien in my contract, and it is very specific, and we don't have it by a certain date. It's there. We also have an arbitration clause in our contract. So, if this continues to go on, we are not going to trail it off. I have too many projects and too many customers to help and too many employees to pay, too many vendors to pay, to where if someone wants to ghost us, I am going to lean on the legal system to help me. Unfortunately, in my younger days, I was never good at understanding that is there to help. The legal system is so scary, and even I get confused when I, full disclosure, get a speeding ticket because I'm a bad driver. Yes, I know, Terry. Leave me alone. But the fact is the legal system is not only there to just protect homeowners, it's there to protect contractors too. But it all comes back to your contract. So the fact is if you are not going to, within reason, respond to any communication, that's an issue. And so we have gone as far as writing certified letters and things like that. We're not going to show up to the customer's home. The only asterisk in this entire conversation is, heck, we're to the point now where we're fixing 60 homes a week, right? We have had weird situations where homeowners, especially during COVID, they had health problems that we just didn't know about, and they fell off the face of the earth for a few weeks. And they came back and were very apologetic. But what happens is you just got to make sure, set that precedence up before you're done. And Terry, I'm sure you've seen this with contractors. I have never done this, but you let me know if this has happened to you. I've had contractors work in my home that had such a high degree of credibility that before they started, they requested payment up front. Have you had that at your place or any of your places?
No, I haven't. The majority of the time, everyone who's done work for us, it's payment upon completion or acceptance of the work. With some of the contractors, depending on their size, we will go forward and purchase materials if it's special order stuff or higher end stuff, and they don't want to carry that cost, and we can get a hold of it at a better price possibly. And so we've done that, but no, haven't paid up front.
So I got to tell you, I've had 2 different contractors in the last, call it 2-3 years, that's their process. They set it up front very clear. And I know this is regionally kind of charged, but one of them was a storm shelter company, and they clearly said on the contract, like, hey, by the way, the crew will show up before they can even start. They're going to request payment from you. And just know that that's our process. This was the person that booked the appointment. And I was like, oh, okay. And then they showed up. The guy said, hey, so where are we going to put this? And they cut a hole in the concrete in the garage, and then they have their truck all set up. This was at 7 o'clock in the morning. And old Steve got out, and polite, good old boy. I mean, he'd been in the business a while. He was probably in his 50s. And he said, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, I need to go ahead and in this envelope, I need to put a check in here that you paid. If you'll go get that, we can go and get started. And I was like, I wasn't offended because they had set the expectation in front, and Steve was so good at delivering the information. And so I paid him. And I did that with a pool as well, where it wasn't on the job completion, but it was on during certain phases, where they said, we cannot start this phase until we've accepted payment. We just want to make sure you're aware of that. I've never done that in my own business, but contractors do that, and it's powerful. And it shows that they've just ironed out their systems and processes. The easiest way, and I guess I should go back to the beginning of this question, is, well, I guess if the customer ghosts you on completion, but you already got payment, well, I mean, if you did a good job, then there you go. There's no problem. So I'm assuming this question means they're ghosted you on completion and you're not getting paid. Yeah. So I think I got that right.
You know, it is a common practice to see some of the larger contractors when it's a prolonged project and there's high dollar amounts, have payments every 30 days, 60 days. You know, they're submitting for work in place or material that's been delivered.
Yeah.
But,
gosh, they would kind of do that.
Right. So when you're looking at job referrals or getting that next lead, right? Are you relying on Angie's List, HubTac, any of those systems that are out there referring people to you, or is that just a scam?
Okay, I think I saw this in one of the Facebook groups, this question. And, you know, I've done a very good job of preventing myself from naming any certain, call it, well-known names. So let me talk to the contractors face-to-face here. I hate lead generation tools like Angie's List, Thumbtack, Porch, all of them. I hate it because they're charging me to essentially recycle the money and advertise to my competitors. But to be clear, yes, I still to this day in the home service business still use these. Oh, and I hate to do it. It's like, man, I've been clean and sober for so long, but then I still have to keep giving money to my drug dealer. It's like so frustrating. But, you know, in my younger days, I had to use these as a lead gen tool. And then now that I've diversified marketing, which takes some time, the good news, a lot of smaller contractors, they've gotten really good at just building up word of mouth and referrals that they don't have to rely on these sources. But then when they start to scale, they panic and say, hey, I don't have enough leads. So when estimates are needing to be given, they start hiring salespeople and they start looking at low-hanging fruit on lead sources like Angie's List, Thumbtacks, things like that. And by the way, we get plenty of work from all of those services, but what used to be like 30% of my marketing spend is now probably less than 8%. And we only turn it on when we need it. So that gives you a little bit more control, but boy, by golly, you have most folks that do not find success in these systems don't have somebody that can answer that phone within 30 seconds. If you don't have somebody that can answer the phone, heck, and I think some people would argue, if you don't have somebody that can answer an Angie's List phone call within 5 seconds, your conversion rate goes down tremendously. So before you start to think about Angie's List, Thumbtack, Porch, any of those, make sure you have somebody readily available that can answer that damn phone quick. Because, boy, you're going to need it for the conversion rates. Otherwise, yeah, you will burn money.
So I've seen your trucks running around, not just at your warehouse, but out there in the community, you know, driving down the road. And so you have these 20-foot box trucks that are basically double-sided billboards going down the road, obeying all the driving laws and speed limits and just doing an amazing job. But what is it like having a fleet out there? Does that help generate leads? And is it worth the cost of having your name plastered on the side of these vehicles?
Well, yes. If you have a fleet of vehicles, if they're not branded, like, you got to do it. I mean, most contractors dream of being to the point where they can see a billboard all over the city with their name on it. And, practically you're running around with a billboard every single day, even your personal vehicle. Now, granted, if you get to a point where you can scale out of that, and funny little plug, Sydney, her vehicle is not branded because her road rage. Just kidding, Sydney. Joking, not joking. Yeah. But if you've got something out there, you need to go ahead and brand it. Now, here's the thing. Branding is expensive, not only for the cost for professional people to do the graphic work, but then you got to pay for the wrap. But I got to put this out there. I have used a few vendors to wrap my trucks in the past. And typically the cheaper option does not last. And you need these things to last 4 years plus, if you can. Now, when it comes to the actual vehicle itself, be sure to, obviously, we're not all walking around with a briefcase full of money. If you're leasing it, make sure you have those set up in your terms. If you're financing it, we want to make sure that we are writing those expenses off. But the truck wrap itself, if you're an accrual accounting company, we accrue those for 12 months. So that way, on our profit and loss statement, we're not getting hit with a massive amount of truck wrap fees in 1 month. So it's like, man, we didn't make any money in March. Why? And it was like, well, we wrapped a bunch of trucks. Well, that's just because it landed in March and the invoicing did. But yes, you need to have those all set out, all branded. I think one thing that dovetails in there a little bit, and I'm sorry, Terry, I didn't answer your question. Yes, I get leads from those trucks. And just to be clear, I have a fleet of about 19, I think, not counting managers and sales vehicles. We easily get like 5 to 10, that's a 50% markup. There I go talking like a contractor again. So anyway, now I would say like 7 to 10 leads at its lowest a month just on trucks. We know that because we have actually put a specific phone number on there and we ask when we book the appointments. Now, I am experimenting right now with QR codes. Nobody remembers phone numbers. So we're going to actually plaster these massive QR codes as part of our branding on the vehicles because people, I mean, Terry, you totally never text and drive or have your phone in your hand when you drive, right?
Mm-mm. Obey every posted law.
Did the university make you say that?
Maybe.
This sounds terrible. I think my phone's been in my hand for half of this podcast. But
well, and to be honest, your cost associated with wrapping your trucks is probably all the airbrushing they had to do on you.
Yeah. All the makeup. I'd have. Yeah. But no, like we're finding QR codes are just being used more and more and more, and they're cheap. And people will not remember phone numbers, so it's just like bloop, QR code, off you go. It's just been such a cool little resource. So it's like there's a lot of real estate on my box trucks or even pickup trucks that we're just going to start replacing with QR codes. So
now
I am tempted to start QR coding my shirts and polo shirts for my team. And just to see how it converts. So that's not an answer on our Q&A episode, but maybe today's a documentation that Will created one of those ideas that later I'm going to admit was a screw up and I shouldn't have done it. So
now I have seen some larger organizations moving to the point where their delivery trucks, their equipment and material trucks, those are all branded. But the personal trucks that they give out to their upper level management, they'll keep those as clean as possible because their concern is that someone might target them if they are branded for a lawsuit. Intentionally short stop on them and see if it's a quick payday because they know there's a large organization tied behind them.
Yeah. Well, I think that could go both ways, and it's all relative to the company. But I have found that most companies, as they scale, and they have a management team that they want to provide vehicles to, specifically owners. Let's first break out owners. Owners are set to where, they don't want to roll up in, $112,000, Yukon, right? With it branded. Because in home services, the community starts to view that as like, man, they must be making really good money. Honestly, it also comes down to keeping your management vehicles the equivalent of your basic vehicle. Now, the interior can be different, but the outside, if you're going to brand the management vehicles, make sure the outside matches like the limited model. And that helps tremendously, I have found. So I've still got managers that are happy to drive around on Nissan Kicks. But I didn't realize, there's, some pretty cool Nissan Kicks out there on the inside. But on the outside, they all look the same because they're all branded and decaled.
So, Will, I've wandered around your warehouse and possibly gotten in trouble with some of your employees for looking like a vagrant. But the question I have, you have a lot of equipment there. You have trucks, you have hand tools, you have trailers, you have all this stuff, right? When do you stop renting equipment for jobs, and when do you just buy it outright?
Ooh, this is a good question. All right, so let's break this down. Little pieces of equipment and big pieces of equipment. Let's just break that out first.
Okay.
So let's say you need a specialty tool. Actually, Terry, this sounds like a free plug for our conversation at the wine festival this weekend about how I want to get some Festool brand carpentry tools, even though damn well I don't need those tools. They're hobby tool. This is a hobby for me. I don't need to be.
No matter what quality tool you buy, Will, it's not going in to improve the quality of your work.
Yeah.
Your employees, they might get better, but yours, it's still going to stay right about there.
Yeah, that's right. So, that's just a fancy little want of mine. But here, I'm getting my calculator out real quick. So, name a piece of equipment, Terry, that I may need to buy in a construction company.
What are those? The mini skid steers, the little donkeys you're driving around?
Oh, the donkeys.
The Boros?
The dingoes. The Boros. Yeah. So anyway, right here. So, all right, let's talk about a dingo. Yeah, walk behind, bobcat, Toro, ditch witch. They've all got so many names. So, I mean, heck, what do you think one of those run brand new, Terry?
20 to 30?
Yeah, and by the way, listeners, don't hold us to this, but I'm just showing this as a calculation real quick. So, let's just say right in the middle, 25,000. Okay. So if you have a piece of equipment that you need to buy for $25,000, I'm now going to take that and I'm going to divide it. Let me see here. I'm going to show you. Divide by my target net margin. Net. So if you want to make 10% at the end of the year, I'm going to do divided by 0.10. That piece of equipment, if it doesn't make you more than $250,000 at the end of the year, you don't need to buy it. You don't see break even, and you don't pay for that equipment until you've made $250,000 worth of revenue with that product specifically. So even to this day, we've got a multi-million-dollar business. If I bought an excavator, it would literally just sit in the warehouse most of the time. So while we complain about renting it, we can never match the equivalent of that within a given time frame. And by the way, we broke it out to small tools, big tools before. Same thing for small tools. Now, the smaller you get, you may want to look at fleeting, which we've done with Hilti and other companies where we don't own the tools, but they're a lease, if you will. But on the bigger stuff, take the price of that as just a quick math. And boy, after showing so many people that calculation, I have made a lot of bankers angry, but I have made a lot of contractors happy because it's like they don't know. They're in the whirlwind and they think, man, I've got to buy this. Otherwise, I'm just giving my money to the rental company.
Yeah.
One, it's like, well, I mean, if you just rent it, you can build it into your costs, and then eventually you're not sitting on a relic that's just sitting in the shop. And a good example would be why I owned a Harley Davidson back in the early days. I thought I would get into motorcycle riding, and that damn thing was parked in the garage for 2.5 years after my first year because I got busy with work. And I'm like, this is a depreciating asset that's just wasting money. So, sorry, Terry, go ahead.
So if you're looking at those assets that either you've bought, right? How do you track the hand tools and the power tools that are going out with each truck? How do you keep an inventory on those?
Honestly, we're not doing a very good job at it. I'm trying to show some humility to our listeners. It's never going to be perfect, but we're trying. We are trying so hard. We've gone as quick as, we use stickers on the tools, as we've talked about in the past, where our trucks are labeled, they're tagged as a Marvel Avenger. So when you look at the truck, it's got the little sticker on it that shows the character name. But when you go in that truck, it's got the same stickers. Honestly, that has worked better than any other system we've ever had. But it's so visually based and not actually based on, digital management or things like that. We've used a lot of inventory management systems, and really all of them work. When I talk about CRMs or inventory management or any system, the grass is always greener to folks, but really the grass is greener where you water it. So if you have something, just use it. And we have struggled with just trying to get one person to take ownership over it and govern it. So that's one of those things that I will openly admit we've done a lot of different systems. We are re-onboarding some Hilti OnTrack products, which is a digital QR and Bluetooth scanning product. Love it, but then we get a new warehouse manager, and he doesn't know that system, so things fall apart. It's one of our pain points, and hopefully that shows a little bit of humility to our listeners.
It's also important to understand I brought that question up because I know that's one of your pain points. And it's just, you just get to turn the screws just a wee bit more on you.
Dude, I have seen your tool crib at the university, and I'm so jealous. Because I'm like, yeah, there's people that are governing this, but also, the vendors have helped really well because they want your support, to the university. But it's like, you don't know, Terry, and I'm playing victim. You don't know until you've had, 27 production guys all fired up on coffee and burritos in the morning that just want to get to their jobs.
Well, but what you don't understand is the other side of that coin, right? So you have all these individuals who are working with you that have had some level of experience using hand tools, power tools, what have you, right?
Yep.
The idea of taking a class full of young people who some have never picked up a power tool before and taking them through how to use a skill saw, and it is one of the most nerve-wracking days, is watching these young people learn how to use a power tool that can easily take off a finger and maim them very easily, and not being your father in that moment and yelling at these young people and be like,
yeah. Hey, well, now you can go back to the John Malecki episode and show them the shorts just on being like, just respect the tools.
oh yeah.
And you will have it down.
Well, and I'll start each class off when we're using power tools, asking how many left-handed individuals are in the classroom, and because if they're going to pick up a skill saw, it's radically different for a lefty, and you need to make sure you have that conversation.
Oh, dude, so on that note, my brother had a left-handed skill saw when we were growing up. And I can't remember the brand. I think it was a Porter cable, which don't hate on me for saying Porter cable because, back then this was a great tool. Mm-hmm. And that tool got stolen, and I have never seen him more angry because it was a left-handed skill saw. And nobody could use it but him. Mm-hmm. But man, he was upset. And I was like, really? No. And to any of those across the country, I didn't grow up with worm drive saws. where we're at. So I know a lot of people use those around the country. But anyway, man, I think he's probably still talking to his therapist about that. It's crazy.
So, Will, if we're looking at credit card and credit card processing, which credit card processing organization are you using, and why did you make that choice over the others?
All right. Oh, credit card processing. So first off, barrier of entry is very important. That's why I selected, I think we're using, just to be clear, CardPoint right now. We have gone through several over the last 7 years. We do shop the rates every year to keep them competitive, but barrier of entry is very important. So when we look at credit card processing, is how easy is it for our team to collect payment or accept payment from customers while keeping us PCI compliant. So when we decided to go with our recent credit card processing company, we did not have to have dongles. They had a secured application. Their transfer time of funds, they were within 48 hours, and their interest rates were competitive. But we made sure that their interest rates were not something that was an introductory rate that then doubled after year one. So those were the deciding factors. And most of us get really comfortable and busy in our business that we forget to double check and be like, hey, by the way, if I throw a rock, I'm going to hit a credit card processing company. I am going to shop these rates, and I just want to let you know that this is going to happen. And the more transactions that you have with that merchant service, they will fight to keep your business. We just had this happen this year where we ended up having credit card processing fees drop 30% because they knew that we were going to be negotiating those based on our transaction value. But what I do suggest to the smaller contractors out there is if you have a good barrier of entry, double check to make sure it's not something that's being marked up on your CRM. There's a lot of CRMs that are accepting that through their product, and it's no knock against the CRM, to be clear, but they're doing that because they're actually getting a revenue share and they're marking up another product. So I just want to make sure that we've got a little bit of clarity there. If you're smaller and you can accept those margins, that's fine. But a lot of CRMs, they use different merchant services, and they're marking up on top of that, and then you're getting charged the fee. As long as the barrier of entry is good and it's keeping your cash flowing, stick with them. I think it'll be great.
So when you're looking at, so you have a sales team, you have installers, you have managers, you have all these different individuals in your organization, Will. When you're looking at sending them out, maybe you're sending them to another office out of state, maybe you're sending them to training, maybe you're sending them to a conference. How do you look at paying them when they travel? And are you paying them, like, how does that work? Are you paying them from the time they clock in, from the time they hit that job? How does that work for you?
So I remember seeing this question on one of our Facebook groups. And I was like, so do you pay your people to drive to and from the job? And I'm like, yeah, bro, you pay them. Now, let's break it down. My employees are driving my trucks. They are driving company vehicles. They are based on our schedule, things like that. Now, if you are having a subcontracted crew, or maybe you have one centralized location that everybody will drive their own personal vehicles to, then, honestly, it's up to the discretion of the owner. Typically, you don't in those cases, but if they're in branded vehicles and things like that, then by definition, yeah, technically, the second they get into a company-owned vehicle, they are on the clock. So to break that down a little bit more clearly, and I'm sure some CPAs or accountants are going to argue with me here, but come at me, bro, right? And what I mean by that is there's probably some stipulation in line item C23 of some code book or whatever, but technically, even if an employee gets in the car in their driveway and it is a personal or a company-owned vehicle, then by definition, they're on the clock. especially because they're on property owned by the company. And now I'm even thinking like, man, I need to double check my policies. But that's my interpretation of it. But yes, if they're driving to your job and your property, they need to be on the clock. I don't care if they're in the back seat sleeping. They're on the clock. And that's just the way it works. So, but nevertheless, Terry, how far down the list are we? I feel like we're going a little long today, but hopefully it's helpful.
Well, it's the quality, not the quantity there. Will, come on now.
Well, I tell you what, let's finish on this one because I want to ping it back to you a little bit. I want to relax, enjoy my beverage. So we hear this all the time, like these kids don't want to work anymore. You know, they don't pay attention, but you have seen the value in teaching some of these students. So, you know, if you could give any advice out there to contractors that are struggling with these 25 and under workforce employees, you know, you get to work with them every day. In fact, you get to work with them more than I ever get to work with them. So, like, what's the top 2 or 3 things you could give advice on in working with a 25 and under employee in the trades?
Well, probably looking at these young people who are coming into our industry, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is when we label them all as this type of generation or they all have these stereotypes. You need to look at each one of these people as their own individual. And you're going to have some that might fit that stereotype. And then you're going to have others who are breaking that trend. And so if you look at anyone who's under, let's say, 22 years of age, and they're like, oh, they're going to be this stereotype, they're going to do this, they're always going to be on their cell phone. That's not always true. The person they are is significantly dependent on the way they were raised, how involved their parents were, where they came from, did they come from a city, did they come from a rural area, and what that childhood looked like. The other thing I'd say is a young person pulls their cell phone out, you know, I obviously think, and I bet you might think, oh, they're going to text or they're going to get on some social app and they're not paying attention to me. Where I have students who do nothing but they're taking notes, they're researching, they're getting the answer right then and there. And so something that I wouldn't have thought about doing, they're already getting the solution. They're just getting in a very different way than I would have done that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I called somebody out in a group meeting the other day and I'm like, dude, get off your phone. And I felt bad. He was like, no, I'm genuinely taking notes. And the phone was filled with way more notes than anybody that had pen to paper. And I was embarrassed. Like I had to apologize to the employee. Because I was like, oh, they're not on their phone just because they're cruising social media. That's because it's what they're using to take freaking notes. It's crazy.
And the idea is that's something that you wouldn't do, right? And so you assume that what they're going to do with their cell phone is get on social media, right? But that's an internal realization of what you're going to do, not them. And so you got to be very cognizant of that. The other thing that I'd say is,
go ahead, Terry. I'm listening to you.
You see. Well, you're that millennial generation, so I can rag on you just a little bit.
Yeah, we are the worst, man. We are social media junkies. I already wrote you a 1-star Yelp review based on this podcast. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
The other thing that I would say is when looking at these young individuals, that you need to be direct and you need to be honest with them. And it might just be my position where I see students come back from internships and I get to talk and work with the students, and then I get to talk and work with the employers of the students, and I get to see 2 sides of a coin. And I'm talking with the employer, I'm talking with the people who were working with the young person, and they're talking about all the areas that the student was lacking during the internship, and not like, well, they didn't know this or that, not things that you could expect, but just like they were showing up late. They weren't paying attention. They were having all these negative things, right? And then I'm talking with the employer about the student's internship. I'm like, did anyone really have a conversation with them and be very direct about these are the things that we've seen so far that are negatives that you need to correct if you want to be successful in this industry? And no one had that conversation. And so I get to talk with the student after their internship, and it was the greatest thing, right? They had the best time. They loved it. They thought they did a great job. And so I'm walking this line now of knowing that the employer is not going to ask the student back, but the student, no one took the time to say, hey, you are a smart young person, but you're really screwing up right now. You're not showing up on time. You're not. These are things that have been ingrained in different generations to show up early, to be punctual, to be ready to go. And if we don't see that in the young person, we have to give them the chance to correct their behavior. If we give them the chance, if we lay out what they're doing wrong and they continue to do it wrong, then it's on them. But if we don't tell them how to improve, it's on us at that point in time.
Yeah. Isn't it funny? Like, sometimes it's just, well, I think as human beings, we all just want to know, right? So it's like, come on, like, just tell me and I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as society grows, and it's including construction, we're just not really good at giving good, solid, high emotionally intelligent feedback. Like, hey, by the way, you know you made that mistake. Do you know that I can help you correct that? And is that something you want to? Anyway, we'll go into a whole other hour-long episode on that. Well, Terry, I know we went long today, but the good news is our one mistake that we can brag about is that you and I went to a wine festival this weekend, and we killed it.
Yep.
But we made it through another Q&A episode. Ironically, we did not make it through all the questions. But pile it up, folks. Throw it in the comments, and we'll get to it on the next one. You know, if there's an overload of those, we'll just move up the Q&A episode. But we appreciate you guys for being on another episode of Beers with Contractors. We got tons of new guests coming up in our next season, which we are coming up on a year, Terry. And if you made it this far, not only in the episode, but the year, thank you for that. And otherwise, we will see you guys next week. Thanks so much.
See ya.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.